Hi, I'm Professor Thomas White. I'm founder and director of IBECC, and this is a presentation on presentations. I decided to make this short slideshow because when I was talking to some students the other day and giving them some advice about their upcoming presentation, it occurred to me that the advice that I was giving are all tips that I've picked up in the more than 20 years that I've been involved in the program, and they've all come from executives who do presentations pretty much for their living. And I thought that it would be helpful to share this with all of the teams and anyone who might be interested. I'm also going to ask our senior judges and also the judges who are going to be judging in the competition to watch this to get some sense of at least a baseline of expectations. Obviously, some of what I'm passing on, student coaches or faculty member may have a different position on, but this is at least one point of view about some presentations and at least to get sort of some basics down about how to proceed. The first thing to think about as a presentation is that it is not a presentation. That is, do not think about it as a presentation. If you think about it as a presentation, you will be thinking about something that will make you stiff, formal, not relaxed, and the best way to think about the presentation is that you are having a conversation with people. You have an audience in front of you. These are people whom, in this role play that you're doing, are people whom you want to persuade to do something. And by thinking of it as a conversation, it keeps you focused on your audience and building a relationship with your audience. One mistake you definitely do not want to make is that you fall back into this position of narrating a slideshow. You need to be the most important person in the room. You need to be active. And so don't think of this as a presentation. Think about this as a conversation. You'll be more relaxed and everything will flow much better. Let's start with some basics. First of all, where do you stand? How do you stand? And what do you do with your hands? I got some interesting advice a number of years ago that the best place to stand for a presentation is to the left of the screen. And the reason for that is English goes from left to right. And the professional presenter who was communicating this illustrated this in various ways, but that if you're at the left of the screen, if you use your hands to direct the audience's attention, for example, to the screen, it may not even be noticed by the audience, but it's a much smoother and much more natural and more relaxed way for them to read the screen. Now, I do know that a number of teams position people in different parts of the room. That sometimes works well. The only problem is that if you have someone to the left of the screen, someone to the right of the screen, someone forward, the screen then in many ways becomes the focal point rather than the speakers. And particularly if the person on the right wants to gesture towards the screen, he or she typically does a sort of vague gesture towards the screen, and the audience isn't quite sure where to look, whether it's at the screen or at the speaker. But I've always found the advice of positioning your speaker to the left of the screen really does work well. Your posture should be relaxed. It should not be stiff. You aren't standing at attention, but you do have to sort of present a sense of confidence. Hands can become problematic. If you're wearing slacks, do not put your hands in your pockets. Do not cross your hands in front of you. Do not cross your hands behind you. All of those give a really stiff posture, stiff look. Keep your hands relaxed by your side. I know another school of thought suggests that your hands should always be somewhere between your waist and your shoulders, but again, sort of relaxed in gesturing. But definitely avoid the standing at a posture, standing at attention, crossing arms, crossing your hands in front of you and clasped behind you. We all have nervous mannerisms. All I can say is know what they are and don't do them. If you don't know what they are, ask your friends. They probably know them extremely well, and a good friend will tell you what your nervous mannerism is, particularly when you speak. I remember one presentation where the nervous mannerism of the woman speaking was that now she was standing at a podium and holding onto the podium, and what she was doing was taking her foot out of her shoe and then putting her foot back into the shoe. And after 3 or 4 times of that, it was clear that the audience was pretty much watching how many times she'd do that and was only halfway listening to her. So you don't want to detract anything away from you. As I said, if you don't know what your nervous mannerism is, ask a friend. Tone is incredibly important in this particular kind of presentation. Ethics is not about telling people that they're doing something wrong and then trying to shame them into doing what you think is the right thing to do. In this role-playing, you're likely a consulting company who has been hired by a senior management of another company, and you're giving them advice about how to handle a problem. That means your tone has to be friendly, supportive. You don't want to be making them defensive. You don't want to make them feel aggressive towards you because you're now telling them they're bad people. That means you have to be very careful about how you characterize what the company is doing. Don't say they're being greedy, they're being unethical. If you have to say something like that, the best way to do it is to describe the situation and say that part of what you've discovered, part of your concern is that important constituencies, important stakeholders could regard this as unethical. Everyone would know what you're doing, but at least you're avoiding a blunt accusation of the company. For particularly difficult topics that you're working with, that is ones that are particularly challenging in telling the company that there's been a problem and then giving them a solution, your job is to give people bad news, but to do it in a way in which they end up saying thank you for it. This is a tough challenge, but that should be your goal. It doesn't undercut anything that you're saying as far as the seriousness of it, because you aren't going to be sugarcoating anything. You aren't going to be whitewashing anything. You're going to be straight, but you're going to be diplomatic. So always be very cautious about tone. Do not read your presentation. Don't read from a script. Don't read from the slides. Reading puts people to sleep. And also don't memorize your portion. The problem with memorizing is that it sounds like you're reading. More importantly, a memorized speech is only as strong as its weakest link. If you forget anything at a certain point, you're dead in the water. And the worst, I feel terrible about the person for whom this happened. I've seen this happen more than once. But the worst situation we had in IBECC in this regard was back when we had an overall winner. We would have a final session where there were the top 2 or 3 teams who would do their 10-minute, 90-second presentations in front of everyone. So we're talking about maybe an audience of a couple of hundred people. One team, first speaker went, second speaker started. She got about 2 minutes into the talk and forgot what word came next. And all she could do was stand there silently trying to remember. When she couldn't remember, she went back and started again, started her portion again. She kept going. She got to the same spot, forgot again. Now, trust me, as bad as she felt, everyone in the audience felt worse, because we wanted her to do so well, so badly, that it really was just a very difficult moment for everyone. We were just rooting for her so much and felt so badly that this was happening to her. Fortunately, the third time she did it, got through, but let it be a lesson. Don't memorize. When you memorize something and you then try to do it in front of an audience, you're nervous. Odds are you're going to forget something, and that's not a situation that you want to be in. In presentations, you live by the rule of 3. You tell your audience what you are going to say, you tell it to them, and then you tell them that you've told it to them. It's important to keep in mind that listening to people is different from reading. And we communicate differently orally than by reading. Repetition helps. And if you're listening to someone and you get distracted for a minute, it's going to help if someone will repeat that in some way. So you can do this in a couple of ways. Certainly in the whole structure of your presentation. you should start telling us what you're going to do, and then there's the body of the presentation, and then at the end you want to summarize. You want someone to come and summarize the whole thing, at least the big points. You can also do this in terms of each presentation, that is each piece of the presentation, where you can do this with transitions or handoffs between speakers, or in your own portion, your individual portion, you introduce it, say what you're going to do, you say it, and then you briefly remind people of that. But the rule of three is key to live by in presentations. Speaking of three, one of our Uber judges, Barney Rosenberg, tells the great story that he picked up from a judge. Barney's an attorney. This came from a court case that he was either in or heard about. The idea is that you prepare, or we think about presentations in three ways. That in essence, we prepare or we give three talks. So there are three talks that are in our mind. There's the talk that we prepare ahead of time. There's the talk that we give. Most importantly, there's the talk that we wish we gave, the one that we're thinking about after we finished. And we all do this. As soon as we're done, we say, gosh, I wish I had done this, that, or the other thing. In any formal presentation, IBECC or anything else, the third talk is the one that you want to give the first time. So that means practice a number of times, decide what needs to be revised, and give us the third talk at the competition. Obviously, you have to control the audience's focus, and I just don't mean this in sort of a trivial way. You have to keep in mind that you have a limited amount of time, you have a specific agenda on hand, and the audience has to focus on you and focus on your information in a way that makes it very likely that they're going to end up doing what you want them to do. So one of the ways it's doing that is what I've been doing, what I did on that last slide, and I'll do here. It's what's called a build slide, where you bring up one point at a time. I'll go back to the last slide. You'll notice two things. I bring up one line at a time, and then when I get finished with a line, I dim it. So see, this is the next line. See, this one is now white. The first one has been dimmed. And so that's one way that you can control the audience's focus. You do this through PowerPoint, through the custom animation tab, and one line at a time means that that's all your audience is going to be looking at. Now this helps keep you, the speaker, as the center of attention. As I said before, you are not a narrator to a slideshow. You're the most important person in the room. Your slideshow is just the background. By controlling your audience's focus, particularly on the slides that they see one line at a time, they're going to be paying attention to you, not reading the rest of your slide. Question comes up where to put your team. I mentioned this briefly when I was talking about where to position yourself. I'm a fan of, while the team is always on stage, as it were, that the person speaking is always to the left of the screen. Now I know, as I said, some people do, some teams space themselves around. In that case, you just have to make sure that when you do this, you are controlling the audience's focus so that there's a structured way and a sort of a predictable way that we know who's going to be speaking. I have seen presentations where there's just a lot of bouncing back and forth, and it makes the audience not as focused on what your central message is, because we're watching different speakers. But so it's an important. You have to really have a good idea of how positioning your team is going to work in controlling the audience's attention. The introduction that you have, and this is especially important for IBECC, is very important because this is a role play. We need to know who you are, and this is most likely you're a fictional consulting company that's been hired, who your audience is. Are they senior management? Is it a board? What's the company? Most importantly, what is it that you want them to do? In business presentations, there's no mystery. That is, you tell people right up at the bat, right at the top of the presentation, right off the bat, what it is that you're there for, what they hired you to do, and what your solution is going to be. This isn't something where, like in some academic presentations, you roll out a lot of information and then you present the conclusion. tell us what the conclusion is right at the beginning. And the reason for that is business presentation, the information is secondary to what you want us to do. The information is going to be important for the significance of it. We need to know what you want us to do, because in that case, we then watch everything through that lens. Your audience then will be deciding whether or not your information is going to persuade them to do that. So this can be as structured as, hi, we're the IBECC consulting company. You, the board of directors of so-and-so, have hired us to look into this particular problem. You asked us to address the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem, propose a solution, and our solution is going to be this. It can be just very as brief and structured as that, but at least it gives your audience a heads up about what's to come. Transitions between speakers can also help in this regard, underscoring what the central theme is. It also provides a sense of unity and cohesion to the presentation. So when you go from one speaker to another, make it plain that you know one another, that there's some logic here. Introduce yourself, explain what you're doing. Again, this is the rule of 3. You do it, you conclude, and you say, and now here's our next speaker, so-and-so, who's going to talk about the financial dimensions of the case. That person comes up, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm going to talk about the financial dimensions, da-da-da-da. The handoff then, as I said, brings a real kind of unity to the presentation. It also reinforces the idea that you're a genuine team and not just a bunch of strangers who are doing one talk after another. Slides, obviously an important part of everything. Now I'm doing a very simple format on this. I know there are some more elaborate ways that slides get done, but I like something fairly simple, and especially for this kind of sort of online PowerPoint, a simple setup and simple background is good. As I said before, the most important thing to keep in mind about slides is they are secondary to you. Don't have a slideshow that's so engaging that we forget about you. You're the most important person role. Your slides are a tool, so keep in mind that and don't make yourself the narrator to a slideshow. Of course, they should be high contrast. That means either light background, dark print, dark background, light print. Make sure the print is high. Make sure that everything is easy to read. Color contrast, high contrast is good, but I'd strongly recommend that you avoid a black background. In a dark room, a black background on slides sucks the light out of the room. It gives a very dark sense to everything, and it always seems to be the case that when I see presentations with black backgrounds, they just are dull no matter what. So avoid that. As I said, make things easy to read. Animation is something you want to think twice about. If it can work, if it works in your presentation, that's fine. You don't want to have anything, and even if you have some animation on a slide, it shouldn't be something that continues, because otherwise people will keep watching the animation. Movement on a screen can be distracting, so as I said, my preference on slides is to keep it simple, but if you're going to use animation of some sort, if you're going to use movement, make sure that you don't overdo it. Now, I said something before about how to think about the information on the slides. And that is that what's most important is the significance of the information to the central point that you're trying to convince your audience of. So, if you're doing charts and graphs, most important thing is to show trends. It isn't the numbers themselves, it's the significance of the numbers. So any way that you can underscore the relationship between the information and what you're trying to convince us of, the better. Information for its own sake is not appropriate in a business presentation. You don't need to impress us with how much you know. This is all about what do you know about this problem and the solution that's going to recommend that we follow what you think we should do. This also means that if you have information on a slide, use it. If you aren't going to use it, lose it. Some graphics, some charts have a lot of information that teams don't use at all. If it's going to be up on the slide, people are going to look at it. If they're going to look at it, they should be looking at it in a way that you want them to, when you want them to, for your purpose. If you just have too much information on a slide, your audience is going to be distracted, and you are not going to be the center of attention at that point. So again, use it or lose it. Since this is a business ethics competition, I wanted to talk some about how to handle the ethical issues, at least give you some tips about some central points about this. The approach that you want to use in a business way of talking about ethics should be simple, practical, and common sense. That means that you aren't out to impress anyone with your expertise, sort of sophisticated philosophical expertise about this. Your job is to take a sophisticated understanding about ethics and translate it into a down-home, sort of simple, practical way of talking about ethics that works in a business setting. Now you can assume that at some point in the Q&A, someone is going to ask you, why is this an ethical issue? And in fact, you should explain this in some way in your presentation, because this is something that is central. The judges are going to really want to know, do you understand why this is an ethical issue, rather than something that is legal or financial, and what are the key issues here? Now, I believe that for most ethical issues, in some ways virtually all ethical issues, you can reduce that either to an issue where somebody's being harmed or potentially harmed, and then the question comes up, well, is that justifiable? Are there benefits that offset the harm? And also, if there's not a matter of clear, tangible, positive or negative consequences, are people being treated appropriately? People being treated with respect? Are their rights being respected? Are they being treated equally? Is there any discrimination going on? So I believe the simplest way to explain why something is an ethical issue is to say, for example, this is a product that potentially can harm consumers, or this is a production process that can potentially cause oil spills and then cause economic and health problems downstream. Or this is an issue where we believe people's rights to privacy are being infringed upon. This is a situation where people are not being treated with appropriate respect. They're being objectified. So I think that the more that you can take your ethical issue and describe it in those ways, you'll have a nice simple basis of doing that. And the best way to link that to the company that you're talking about is if you can find a statement of corporate values or a mission statement of that company, because in that case, that identifies what they mean by ethics. Those are the central values that the company already has an allegiance to. And so if you can link the issues that you're talking about in your case to those values, you're halfway home in convincing your audience, because you don't get into any of these arguments about, well, gee, why should we worry about ethics, or why should we worry about the issues you're telling us about? You get to say, you asked us to look into this problem. This is who you are as a company. We're just trying to recommend how you now do things in a way that's consistent with the values of your company. So now, if your company does not have a statement of corporate values or a mission statement, one of your recommendations should be that you should have one, and you can design one for them and say this is part of our recommendation. And as obviously, if we're talking about a simple, practical, and common sense approach to ethics, you do not want to use technical, philosophical, theological terminology. People in boardrooms do not brood about what Aristotle or Plato or Immanuel Kant, how their ideas apply to what's going on. It just isn't the way things are done in business, so you definitely do not want to do that at IBECC. Just some couple slides with some final odds and ends. Do not say "you guys" to your audience. I know this is a very common way that we all speak now, but it's in a business presentation, it's too informal. Your audience are not your friends. They are not people you hang out with. They're essentially your bosses, your employers. They've hired you. It's a sign of respect that you address them appropriately. You guys is really too informal. So uh, fight the temptation to address your audience that way. Sometimes when people get nervous in IBECC, they start referring to the company not as you, but they. Remember, we're role-playing. The people you're talking to are pretending to be representatives of that company. So it's a small point, but it helps smooth it if everybody stays in character and you refer to your audience as you. There's some question about how to handle sources and references. There are a couple schools of thought about this. Some people like to have the references or the sources to data that you're presenting on the screen. The problem is that those notations are typically too small to read. It's your call about how you do that. It might, if they're big enough, you might have something there. It certainly makes sense to have a separate slide that you can bring up that shows your sources, that shows your references. Do not, though, now it's common in academic presentations that your last slide may be a list of your sources and references. Don't have that as your last slide at IBECC, because if that's going to be there, that's going to be there through the Q&A. It's going to be distracting. And so have that in reserve. If someone asks you where you got your information, you can bring that slide up and show them. And you definitely need to know where you got your information from and be prepared to say that. But do not have I would not recommend that you have a separate sources and references slide that you're going to put up and leave up. The final thing you're going to be doing in the presentation is the Q&A, and you really can't underestimate the importance of this. Teams tend to show how thoroughly they know something and how comfortable they are with the topic, how deep their knowledge is, more in the Q&A than in the presentation itself. So go into this with confidence, go into this relaxed, and be prepared for the fact, again, this is a conversation you're going to be going back and forth, but this is a great opportunity to demonstrate your mastery of the topic. Some hints though. First of all, make sure you understand the question. Our judges may not always ask the question in the clearest way possible. If you don't understand it, there are a couple of ways that you can approach. You can say, I didn't quite understand, could you ask that again? If it's still not clear, you could say, okay, am I right in thinking that you're asking me this? So before you give an answer, make sure you understand the question, because it may be that this is the judge's fault. That is not a good question. So don't feel you've got to go down the road to make a bad question sound good. Keep your answers short. Be direct to the point. If the person asking the question wants more, they'll ask you again. They'll ask for more information. So make sure you don't ramble. Keep it short, direct to the point, and if a follow-up is necessary, it will be somebody else's job to ask that of you. At the same time, make sure that you answer the question. So you can explicitly say to the person after you finish the answer, did that answer your question? Now in that case, if you haven't, they'd say, well, yes, you did to some extent. Let me ask this again, or let me rephrase that. That also gives them the opportunity, if they want to follow up, they can. And if there was a misunderstanding about the question, that's a place where someone might say, well, I didn't really ask it the way I wanted to, or let me ask it again in this way, and it keeps things clear. There will be situations where you do not know the answer. Don't pretend that you know something that you don't know. In business, in a situation like this, the normal thing is that we say, I don't know, I will find out, and I'll get back to you on that. While this is a role play that we're doing, and judges may not necessarily want to hear what more information, although some do, this is the best way to handle that situation. No one expects that you're going to know absolutely everything about a topic. If you don't know the answer, say so. Finally, just want to wish you good luck. I hope that this presentation has been helpful. Overall, it's just some basics. It's about keeping things clear. It's about keeping you the center of attention. It's about making sure that your slides are not the most important thing. You are the most important thing. It's about helping you keep in mind the importance of a simple, practical, common sense view about ethics, with the idea that the experiences you'll be going through gives you a good opportunity to make your case and make it in a way in which the judges then are able to build on that and give you some very helpful professional feedback. Thanks very much for being involved, and once again, good luck.